It was a crisp autumn morning in Washington, D.C. when a silver Honda pulled up to a routine traffic checkpoint. Behind the wheel sat a woman in her mid-30s, dressed in business casual attire, her natural hair neatly styled. The checkpoint had been set up due to a series of recent incidents in the area, but this stop would prove to be anything but routine. Officer Reynolds, a newcomer to the force with something to prove, approached the vehicle with an air of unwarranted authority. His hand rested unnecessarily on his holster, a detail that didn't go unnoticed by the driver. The woman had already placed both hands visible on the steering wheel, following proper protocol. "License and registration," he demanded, skipping the customary greeting. His tone carried an edge that seemed to slice through the morning air. The woman reached slowly for her documents, maintaining a composed demeanor. "Of course, officer. I'm reaching for my credentials in the glove compartment." Officer Reynolds watched with barely concealed impatience as she retrieved her documents. When she handed them over, he barely glanced at them before launching into an aggressive line of questioning. "Where are you headed? This is an awful nice car for this neighborhood. Is it yours?" The woman's expression remained neutral, but her eyes flickered with recognition of the situation unfolding before her. "I'm on my way to work, officer. And yes, this is my vehicle." "Work, huh?" Officer Reynolds's voice dripped with skepticism. "And what kind of work would that be?" "I'm a federal employee," she replied simply, maintaining her professional tone despite the officer's increasingly confrontational attitude. Officer Reynolds scoffed. "Right. A federal employee. Let me guess, you work as a janitor at the post office?" The woman's patience, while impressive, had its limits. She reached slowly into her jacket pocket and produced another credential. "Actually, officer, I'm a senior operations officer with the Central Intelligence Agency. Here's my badge." The color drained from Officer Reynolds's face as he examined the CIA credentials. His hand, which had been hovering near his weapon, dropped to his side. The badge was unmistakably authentic, complete with the woman's photo and security clearance level. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor," she continued, her voice carrying the weight of years of training and authority. "We need to have a discussion about proper protocol during traffic stops and the department's policies regarding racial profiling." Officer Reynolds stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning dew. I apologize, ma'am. I didn't mean to." "Save it for the formal review," she interrupted, her tone professional but firm. "Your behavior today reflects poorly on your department and violates several constitutional rights. This isn't just about me, it's about every citizen who encounters law enforcement." Within minutes, a superior officer arrived at the scene. The woman, now identified as a high-ranking CIA operative, calmly explained the situation. Her words carried the precision of someone used to giving mission briefings, leaving no room for misinterpretation. As the morning traffic continued to flow around them, a small crowd of onlookers had gathered at a respectful distance. They witnessed something rare: accountability in action. The woman's presence commanded respect not through intimidation, but through unwavering professionalism and knowledge of her rights. The superior officer, a veteran of 20 years on the force, listened intently before turning to Officer Reynolds. The younger officer's face had transformed from arrogant to ashen as he realized the gravity of his actions and their potential consequences. This incident would spark a department-wide review of traffic stop procedures and implicit bias training. Sometimes, the most powerful lessons come from unexpected encounters, and this morning would prove to be a turning point in Officer Reynolds's understanding of power, privilege, and proper police conduct. The incident at the checkpoint quickly rippled through the police department like a stone thrown into still water. By afternoon, the CIA agent's encounter with Officer Reynolds had reached the chief of police's desk, marked as a priority incident requiring immediate attention. Inside a wood-paneled conference room at police headquarters, the chief sat with his command staff, reviewing dashboard camera footage that captured the entire interaction. The room fell silent as they watched Officer Reynolds's increasingly aggressive behavior and the professional response from the CIA agent. "This could have ended very differently," the chief said, his voice heavy with concern. "We're looking at a potential lawsuit, media nightmare, and most importantly, a fundamental failure in our training protocols." The department's internal affairs director, a sharp-eyed woman with 3 decades of law enforcement experience, spread several documents across the conference table. "The agent has filed a formal complaint. It's thorough, detailed, and includes references to specific departmental policies that were violated." Meanwhile, Officer Reynolds sat alone in a smaller office down the hall, writing his incident report. His hands trembled slightly as he typed, remembering the moment he realized his mistake. The agent's CIA badge had done more than just identify her position, it had held up a mirror to his own prejudices and assumptions. The agent herself had returned to her office at Langley, where her encounter quickly became the day's talking point. Her colleagues, a diverse group of intelligence professionals, shared similar experiences with law enforcement. One analyst revealed how he was regularly pulled over in his own neighborhood, despite his FBI credentials. Back at the police department, the afternoon brought more complications. A bystander's cell phone video of the incident had surfaced online, gaining traction on social media. The clip showed Officer Reynolds's aggressive stance and the agent's composed response, already attracting thousands of views and comments. The department's public information officer fielded constant calls from local news outlets. The story was perfect fodder for the ongoing national conversation about police reform and racial profiling. Yet this incident was unique. It involved someone who couldn't be dismissed or intimidated, someone whose authority exceeded that of the local police department. By evening, the chief had called an emergency meeting with the police union representatives. The discussion wasn't about protecting Officer Reynolds, it was about using this incident as a catalyst for change. "We need to get ahead of this," the chief explained, pacing the conference room. "Not with excuses or defensive statements, but with concrete actions. This incident has exposed gaps in our training that we can't ignore." The CIA agent's complaint hadn't just highlighted Officer Reynolds's behavior, it methodically outlined systemic issues within the department. Her intelligence training was evident in how she documented the encounter, providing a detailed analysis of policy failures and potential solutions. Outside the police station, community activists gathered peacefully, holding signs demanding accountability. They were joined by off-duty police officers who believed in reform, creating an unusual alliance that caught media attention. Officer Reynolds watched the gathering from a window, his worldview shifting. The woman he had profiled wasn't just any federal employee, she was someone who, like him, had devoted her life to protecting the nation. The only difference was that she had to prove her authority constantly, while his came automatically with his uniform. The CIA agent's supervisor had contacted the police department, not to demand punitive action, but to offer resources. The agency had developed training modules about implicit bias and professional interaction protocols that they were willing to share. As night fell, the chief made a decision that would define his department's response to the incident. Instead of the usual defensive stance, they would acknowledge the failure openly and use it as a teaching moment. The department would invite the CIA agent to help reform their training procedures, turning a potential crisis into an opportunity for genuine change. The agent, when contacted about this proposal, agreed to participate under one condition: the reforms would need to be measurable and sustainable, not just a temporary response to bad publicity. Her analytical approach to problem-solving would prove invaluable in the coming months. Officer Reynolds, expecting to be fired, was instead assigned to work directly with the Reform Committee. His first-hand experience with confronting his own biases would become a powerful teaching tool for other officers. The day ended with a series of email exchanges between department heads, planning the next steps. The incident that began with a routine traffic stop had evolved into something more significant: a chance to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the communities they served. In her own home that evening, the CIA agent reviewed the day's events. Her actions hadn't just protected her own rights, they had opened a door for systemic change. As she prepared for bed, her phone buzzed with a message from her director: "Your field experience today may save more lives than any covert operation." Well handled. The video spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Within 48 hours of the incident, major news networks picked up the story. Headlines blazed across screens nationwide: CIA agent turns traffic stop into teachable moment, and intelligence officer sparks police reform. Local news crews gathered outside the police department, where the chief prepared to make his first public statement. Unlike typical press conferences following controversial police encounters, this one would set a different tone. "Yesterday's incident has revealed opportunities for improvement within our department," the chief began, standing firm at the podium. "We're not here to defend or excuse, but to acknowledge and correct. We've invited the CIA agent involved to help reshape our training protocols." The agent watched the press conference from her office, noting how the chief's response differed from the usual defensive stance. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages from fellow intelligence officers sharing similar experiences. Each story reinforced the importance of what was unfolding. Community leaders responded to the department's unexpected transparency with cautious optimism. The local NAACP chapter president met with both the chief and the CIA agent, discussing how this incident could catalyze lasting change. "What makes this different," the NAACP president explained to reporters, "is that we have someone who understands both sides, law enforcement and the experience of being profiled. Her unique perspective could bridge gaps we've struggled with for years." Officer Reynolds's transformation became part of the narrative. Instead of being vilified, he emerged as an example of how confronting bias could lead to growth. His written statement, released through the department, showed remarkable self-reflection. "I saw what I expected to see," he wrote, "not what was actually there. My assumptions could have turned a routine stop into a tragedy. I'm committed to helping other officers recognize and overcome these biases." The CIA agent's department approved her participation in reform efforts, recognizing the potential impact beyond local law enforcement. Intelligence agencies had long grappled with similar issues of bias and profiling in their operations. Social media amplified the story's reach. The cell phone video garnered millions of views, but unlike many viral police encounters, the comments reflected hope rather than division. People shared their own stories of prejudice and profiling, creating a digital tapestry of shared experiences. Local universities reached out to the police department, offering to collaborate on research studying the effectiveness of the new training protocols. The incident was becoming a case study in how law enforcement agencies could respond productively to bias-related encounters. The agent's involvement extended beyond just training. She worked with the department's technology team to develop better data tracking systems for traffic stops, ensuring demographic information would be properly monitored and analyzed. Community meetings, usually sparsely attended, now overflowed with residents eager to participate in the reform process. The agent attended these sessions, listening more than speaking, gathering insights that would shape the training programs. Other police departments took notice. Requests for information about the new training protocols poured in from across the country. The chief found himself fielding calls from other law enforcement leaders seeking guidance on implementing similar reforms. The media narrative shifted from the initial incident to the unprecedented collaboration between law enforcement and intelligence communities. News features highlighted how the agent's expertise in analysis and pattern recognition brought fresh perspectives to police training. Officer Reynolds's first public appearance came at a community forum, where he sat alongside the CIA agent. The contrast between their first encounter and current partnership served as powerful visual evidence of change in action. "The hardest part," the agent shared during the forum, "isn't creating new policies. It's changing the mindset that makes incidents like this commonplace. Real change happens in moments of self-reflection, when we question our automatic assumptions. As weeks passed, the story maintained relevance through consistent updates on reform implementation. The department's transparency about progress and setbacks kept public interest and trust alive. The agent's influence extended to recruitment practices, helping the department attract a more diverse pool of candidates. Her presence challenged stereotypes about both law enforcement and intelligence work, inspiring young people to consider careers in public service. 3 weeks after the incident, the department launched its revised training program. The first session opened with the dashboard camera footage from that morning, but now it was a teaching tool, not an embarrassment. Officers watched their colleagues' transformation from a source of tension to an agent of change. The new training program launched on a Monday morning in the department's main conference room. Officers filled every seat, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The CIA agent stood at the front, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. "I'm not here to shame or blame," she began, her voice steady. "I'm here because what happened at that checkpoint represents a crossroads. We can either treat it as an isolated incident, or use it as a catalyst for meaningful change." The training sessions broke new ground in police education. Instead of traditional PowerPoint presentations and lectures, officers participated in immersive scenarios. Each one was designed to challenge their unconscious biases and automatic responses. Officer Reynolds, now part of the training team, shared his experience with each new group. His honesty about his assumptions that morning resonated with fellow officers who recognized their own potential for similar mistakes. "I thought I was following protocol," he explained during one session. "But I was actually following prejudices I didn't even know I had. The badge and uniform gave me authority, but they didn't give me wisdom." The agent introduced techniques from intelligence training that helped officers recognize pattern-based thinking. They learned to question their initial impressions and look for evidence that might contradict their first assumptions. Role-playing exercises placed officers in situations where they were the ones being profiled. The discomfort they felt helped bridge the empathy gap that often existed between law enforcement and marginalized communities. Data analysis became a crucial component of the program. Officers learned to read traffic stop statistics like intelligence reports, identifying patterns that might indicate systemic bias in their patrol practices. In intelligence work, the agent explained, assumptions can be deadly. The same applies to police work. Every time we act on an unchecked bias, we risk not just lives, but the trust of the communities we serve. The training's impact began showing in unexpected ways. Officers started sharing stories of times they'd caught themselves making assumptions during stops. Instead of defensive silence, there was open discussion about moments of potential bias. Community members were invited to participate in training sessions, sharing their experiences with law enforcement. These testimonies transformed abstract statistics into human stories that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Body camera footage from recent stops showed subtle but significant changes in officer behavior. There was more emphasis on respectful communication, less aggressive positioning, and fewer assumptions-based questions. The agent's intelligence background proved invaluable in tracking these changes. She implemented metrics that went beyond simple numbers, measuring the quality of interactions through multiple data points. Local businesses noticed the difference in day-to-day police interactions. Shop owners reported more positive experiences with patrol officers. Community events saw increased officer participation, not as authority figures but as neighbors. The media continued following the story, but now focused on the ripple effects. Other departments sent observers to learn from the program's success. The agent's approach was becoming a model for police reform nationwide. Officer Reynolds emerged as an unexpected champion for change. His willingness to confront his own biases inspired others to do the same. He was promoted to training coordinator, ensuring the program's principles would continue guiding new recruits. The agent supervisors at the CIA took notice of the program's success. They began incorporating elements of the training into their own diversity and bias awareness programs, recognizing that prejudice could compromise intelligence operations just as easily as police work. As the first month of training concluded, the department released preliminary data showing a significant decrease in complaint filings. Traffic stops showed more consistent patterns across demographic groups, suggesting more equitable enforcement. The agent's final training session focused on sustainability. "This isn't about one incident or one department," she emphasized. "It's about creating a new standard for law enforcement that recognizes the humanity in every interaction." Looking back at that morning at the checkpoint, both the agent and Officer Reynolds could see how a moment of confrontation had transformed into an opportunity for lasting change. Their story became more than just another viral video, it became a blueprint for reform. The story that began at a routine checkpoint in Washington, D.C. had sparked a national movement. News outlets across the country highlighted the unique partnership between a CIA agent and a local police department, portraying it as a model for modern law enforcement reform. Police departments from major cities sent representatives to observe the training program. They watched as officers engaged in scenario-based learning, analyzed traffic stop data, and participated in community dialogue sessions. The CIA agent's approach, combining intelligence methodology with practical law enforcement needs, offered a fresh perspective on addressing systemic bias. A prominent police chief from Chicago remarked, "What makes this program different is its focus on measurable outcomes rather than just feel-good conversations. We're seeing real behavioral changes in officers who complete the training." Officer Reynolds traveled to several police academies, sharing his experience. His story resonated particularly with younger officers who saw themselves in his initial mistakes. "I'm not proud of who I was that morning," he told a group in Atlanta, "but I'm proud of who I've become because of it." The training program's success caught the attention of federal law enforcement agencies. The FBI incorporated elements of the curriculum into their own diversity training, recognizing the value of combining intelligence and law enforcement perspectives. Congressional leaders invited the CIA agent to testify about the program's impact. Her testimony focused on practical solutions rather than political rhetoric. She presented data showing reduced complaints, improved community relations, and more efficient policing practices. Social media continued amplifying the story's reach. Body camera footage from graduates of the program showed striking differences in how they handled routine stops. These videos went viral for positive reasons, showing respectful interactions that diffused potential confrontations. The agent's original department implemented similar reforms across all CIA training programs. "Bias doesn't just affect street-level law enforcement," she explained during a closed-door briefing. "It can compromise intelligence operations at every level." Local businesses reported improved relationships with law enforcement. A small business owner told reporters, "Officers now enter our stores as community members first, law enforcement second." The difference in approach is remarkable. As the program marked its first quarter, the data spoke volumes. Complaint rates had dropped by 60%. Traffic stop statistics showed more equitable enforcement patterns. Community trust metrics reached historic highs. The transformation wasn't just about numbers. Officers reported higher job satisfaction, feeling more connected to the communities they served. The us versus them mentality that often characterized police work began dissolving. What started as a tense encounter between an officer and a CIA agent had evolved into a blueprint for nationwide reform. Their story proved that meaningful change was possible when accountability met opportunity, and when individuals chose growth over defensiveness. 6 months after the checkpoint incident, the CIA agent sat in her office reviewing a stack of letters from officers who'd completed the training program. Each shared personal stories of transformation, moments when they caught themselves before making the same mistakes that Officer Reynolds had made that morning. One letter stood out. A veteran officer of 15 years wrote about a traffic stop that could have gone wrong. "I approached the car with my usual suspicions," he wrote. "But I heard your voice in my head, asking me to question my assumptions." The driver turned out to be a retired military colonel. "In the past, I might have escalated that situation unnecessarily." Officer Reynolds himself had undergone the most visible transformation. The man who once approached cars with unwarranted aggression now led sensitivity training sessions. His personal journey from prejudice to awareness became a powerful teaching tool that resonated with officers nationwide. The agent's own life had changed too. Her work at the CIA now included regular consultations with law enforcement agencies. She developed new protocols for cross-agency cultural training, breaking down barriers between federal and local law enforcement. Community members noticed the changes in their daily interactions with police. A local pastor shared how officers now attended community events out of genuine interest rather than obligation. "They're not just watching us anymore," he said. "They're listening, learning, and becoming part of our community." The department's internal culture shifted dramatically. Officers began holding each other accountable, calling out biased behavior before it could escalate into incidents. The blue wall of silence gave way to a culture of active responsibility. The chief's leadership style evolved as well. Instead of managing crises, he focused on preventing them through better training and community engagement. His department became a model for others, showing how transparency and accountability could strengthen rather than weaken law enforcement. Local businesses reported more positive interactions with patrol officers. Shop owners who once viewed police presence as intimidating now saw it as reassuring. The us versus them mentality that had dominated police-community relations began to dissolve. Even the media coverage changed tone. Reporters who once approached police stories with skepticism found themselves documenting a rare example of successful reform. The checkpoint incident was now referenced as a turning point in modern policing. The agent's original goal of addressing a single incident of profiling had sparked a movement larger than she'd imagined. Personal transformations multiplied into departmental changes, then spread across jurisdictions, creating ripples of positive change throughout law enforcement. 1 year after the checkpoint incident, the police department organized a special commemoration event. The community center buzzed with activity as residents, officers, and media gathered to reflect on a year of unprecedented change. The CIA agent, who had become a catalyst for transformation, stood quietly at the back of the room, observing the fruits of their collective labor. The chief took the podium first, his demeanor reflecting the department's evolution. "A year ago, we faced a choice," he began. "We could have treated that morning as just another incident, filed it away, and moved on. Instead, we chose to see it as an opportunity for real change." The statistics displayed on screens around the room told a compelling story. Traffic stop complaints had decreased by 75% over the year. Community trust ratings had doubled. Officer satisfaction scores reached record highs. But beyond the numbers, the real changes were evident in the room's atmosphere. Officer Reynolds, now a nationally recognized advocate for police reform, shared his journey with the assembled crowd. "That morning changed more than just my career," he reflected. "It changed how I see the world. Every traffic stop, every interaction, is an opportunity to either build trust or break it." The agent finally stepped forward to speak, her presence still commanding the same quiet authority it had that morning at the checkpoint. "Change doesn't happen in grand gestures," she began. "It happens in small moments, in split-second decisions, in the pause before we act on our assumptions." Community leaders took turns sharing stories of transformation. A local business owner described how officers now knew shop owners by name, stopped in for casual conversations, and became part of the neighborhood fabric. A high school principal spoke about officers mentoring students, breaking down barriers that had existed for generations. The training program had evolved beyond its original scope. What started as bias awareness had grown into a comprehensive approach to community policing. Officers learned to read neighborhood dynamics like intelligence analysts, identifying problems before they escalated into crises. The media coverage highlighted an unexpected outcome: crime rates had decreased across the board. When communities trusted law enforcement, they became more willing to cooperate, share information, and work together to prevent crime rather than just respond to it. Other departments that had adopted the program shared their experiences via video messages. From Seattle to Miami, police chiefs reported similar transformations. The checkpoint incident had sparked a movement that was reshaping American law enforcement. The agent's CIA colleagues had taken notice too. Intelligence agencies began incorporating community engagement principles into their operations, recognizing that trust building was as crucial to national security as surveillance and analysis. Officer Reynolds's original dashboard camera footage, once a source of shame, now played at police academies nationwide. Cadets studied it alongside the footage from recent graduates, seeing the stark contrast in approach and outcome. Local universities conducted research on the program's impact, documenting changes in officer behavior, community response, and overall safety metrics. The results were clear: when law enforcement prioritized understanding over authority, everyone benefited. The commemoration event included interactive demonstrations of the training scenarios. Community members participated alongside officers, experiencing firsthand how the program challenged assumptions and built empathy. Technology played a crucial role in the year's success. The department had implemented new data analysis tools, suggested by the agent, that helped identify patterns in police interactions. This data-driven approach made it impossible to ignore or excuse biased behavior. The agent shared how the experience had influenced her own work at the CIA. Intelligence work is about understanding people, cultures, and motivations, she explained. The same skills that make good intelligence officers, observation, analysis, and suspension of judgment, make good police officers. Young people in the community began viewing law enforcement differently. Applications to the police academy increased, particularly from minority communities. The department was slowly beginning to reflect the diversity of the city it served. As the event concluded, the chief announced new initiatives for the coming year. The program would expand to include civilian oversight committees, youth mentorship programs, and enhanced mental health response training. The agent's final remarks touched on the power of individual choices. 1 year ago, two people faced each other at a checkpoint, both wearing badges, both servants of the public. What could have been a confrontation became a catalyst. Change is always possible when we choose to learn rather than defend. Looking around the room, she saw the living proof of that transformation. Officers and community members chatted easily, sharing stories and plans for future collaboration. The tension that once defined police-community relations had been replaced by something more powerful: mutual respect and understanding. 18 months after the checkpoint incident, the CIA agent stood before a graduating class of police cadets from across the country. The training program had evolved into a National Police Academy curriculum, mandatory for new officers and veterans alike. As she looked at the diverse faces before her, she reflected on how a single morning had catalyzed a revolution in law enforcement. "Your badges will give you authority," she told the graduates, "but your actions will earn you respect. Every interaction is an opportunity to build trust or break it. Choose wisely." The original department had become a hub for police reform, hosting delegations from international law enforcement agencies. Countries from Canada to Japan sent observers to study how a confrontation at a checkpoint had transformed into a model for modern policing. Officer Reynolds, now a nationally recognized training coordinator, had just published a book about his experience. The badge of change became required reading at police academies, its honest account of personal transformation resonating with officers at all levels of service. The program's success had sparked interest from unexpected quarters. Corporate leaders began attending modified versions of the training, recognizing how unconscious bias affected their organizations. The principles that transformed police work proved equally valuable in addressing workplace discrimination. Research universities conducted long-term studies on the program's impact. The data showed sustainable improvements in community relations, officer safety, and law enforcement effectiveness. Crime rates continued to drop as community trust grew stronger. The agent's CIA colleagues had fully integrated the program's principles into their operations. Intelligence gathering improved when agents learned to question their assumptions and build genuine community connections. National security and community trust were no longer seen as competing priorities. Local schools incorporated elements of the program into their curricula. Students learned about civic engagement, implicit bias, and constructive dialogue. The next generation was growing up with a different perspective on law enforcement and community relations. The department's original dashboard camera footage had been viewed millions of times online, but now it was accompanied by interviews with both the agent and Officer Reynolds, showing how a potential crisis became an opportunity for growth. Technology played an increasingly important role in the program's evolution. New artificial intelligence tools, developed with input from both law enforcement and community leaders, helped identify patterns in police interactions while protecting privacy and civil rights. The agent's work had earned recognition from civil rights organizations and law enforcement agencies alike. She received numerous awards, but more importantly, she saw a real change in communities across the nation. The us versus them mentality that had dominated police-community relations was giving way to a spirit of collaboration. Small businesses reported sustained improvements in their relationships with local police. Officers were seen as partners in community safety rather than just enforcers of the law. Shop owners who once viewed police presence with suspicion now welcomed it. The program's impact extended beyond traditional law enforcement. Emergency responders, social workers, and mental health professionals adopted its principles, creating a more comprehensive approach to public safety. Youth engagement became a cornerstone of the program's success. Police departments established mentorship programs, sports leagues, and educational initiatives. Officers became role models rather than authority figures to be feared. The media narrative around law enforcement began to shift. While problems still existed, there were now proven solutions and examples of successful reform. The checkpoint incident became a case study in how to transform confrontation into collaboration. International law enforcement agencies began implementing their own versions of the program. The principles that worked in Washington, D.C. proved equally effective in addressing police community tensions around the world. As the graduation ceremony concluded, the agent shared a final thought with the new officers. The morning that changed everything taught us that authority comes in many forms. True power lies not in forcing compliance, but in earning trust. Officer Reynolds joined her on stage, their presence together symbolizing the journey from confrontation to collaboration. Every morning, someone faces a choice at a checkpoint, he told the graduates. Make sure your choice builds bridges rather than walls. The legacy of that morning continued to grow, proving that meaningful change was possible when people chose understanding over assumption, growth over defensiveness, and community over division. The badge behind the badge had become a symbol of transformation, not just for law enforcement, but for society as a whole.